I found that message at 5:47 in the morning, and for those first few seconds, I thought I was still dreaming, caught in that strange space between sleep and waking where your brain hasn't quite sorted out what's real yet. Blue light cutting through my dark bedroom like a knife, my phone screen glowing on the nightstand with a text from the contact I'd labeled Mother, because I hadn't found the courage to delete it entirely. And I definitely didn't have the strength to see her actual name appear on my screen every time she reached out. The words were short, just 5 of them, but they carried the weight of 33 years of history, 33 years of learning to make myself small, 33 years of trying to be good enough. We know where you are. Not, we miss you. Not, can we talk? Not, how are you doing? Just that cold little sentence that said everything about how they saw this situation, like I was a runaway teenager who needed to be tracked down and brought home, instead of a 33-year-old woman trying desperately to build a life that didn't hurt every single day. I placed the phone face down on my nightstand, and I did it slowly, deliberately, with intention, the way Mrs. Okafor had taught me to handle what she called loud objects, things that don't actually have volume controls, but somehow manage to fill up all the air in a room and make it hard to breathe. The apartment went quiet, except for 2 sounds that became my anchors in that moment. 2 sounds that reminded me I was still here, still alive, still moving forward. The wall clock ticking steadily in my kitchen, unbothered and consistent, and the electric kettle in the corner beginning its quiet morning song as the automatic timer I'd set last night clicked it on for my usual 6 o'clock wake-up tea. Those 2 sounds, that tick and that warming hum, they reminded me that time was still moving forward in normal ways, that the world outside my panic hadn't actually stopped just because my heart felt like it had forgotten how to beat properly. By noon that day, after hours of sitting at my kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the rain streaking down my window and trying to talk myself down from the fear, I had constructed a plan. It fit on a single index card, 3 inches by 5 inches, the kind you can buy at any drugstore for 99 cents, the kind college students use for studying. The plan wasn't complicated. It wasn't particularly clever. It wasn't the kind of thing that would impress anyone if I tried to explain it. It was just clear, which I was learning through painful trial and error was infinitely more important than being right or being smart or being justified or winning some argument that only existed in my head. By evening, as the Seattle sky transitioned through its winter color palette, that particular sequence that only happens in the Pacific Northwest, where gray becomes darker, gray becomes purple, becomes black, all before 5 o'clock. As the rain picked up and turned my studio apartment windows into rivers, I understood something I'd been trying to understand for 3 years of therapy and 2 failed attempts at setting boundaries, and countless nights lying awake bargaining with myself. Sometimes the smallest pieces of paper hold up the largest walls. Sometimes safety fits in your back pocket. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is a 3x5 index card with 3 sentences written in blue ink. But let me step back, because the truth lives in the details, and you deserve to know the actual path that brought me here. Not the cleaned-up version, not the Instagram version, but the messy, complicated, sometimes boring, often terrifying real version. Let me show you what the 13 days before that 5:47 a.m. message looked like, because context transforms a story from sounding dramatic and exaggerated into revealing what actually happened, what it actually takes to build a life when your family is the thing you're trying to survive. 41 missed calls. I know that number precisely, exactly, because I'd started keeping a log in a black and white composition notebook I kept on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, writing down every single attempt at contact with the date and time and caller, and a brief note about what the voicemail said if they left one. Those 41 calls accumulated between 11:07 at night and 12:43 in the morning, stacked up like evidence, like proof, like a pattern I could point to and say, "See, this is why I need help." They were hunting for that vulnerable window between awake and asleep, that space where your defenses are crumbling and you're too tired to maintain your boundaries, and you might answer the phone just to make the ringing stop, just to make it all go away for a moment. The names attached to those calls, I recognized every single one. My mother, obviously, her name appearing on my screen 17 times in one night. My father, less frequent, but more aggressive somehow. His calls coming in clusters at 11:30 and midnight and 12:15, like he was building up rage between attempts. My Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister, a woman who'd barely acknowledged my existence for the past 5 years, until suddenly I became the family crisis that everyone needed to discuss and fix and manage. My cousin Rebecca, who I used to be close with when we were kids, who I used to trade books with in middle school, who'd slept over at my house 100 times and knew all my secrets, now calling me at midnight because someone had recruited her into this campaign. These were numbers that used to represent Sunday afternoon potlucks, where everyone ate too much potato salad and laughed too loud at jokes that weren't that funny, and performed being the kind of family that appears in television commercials selling insurance or minivans. Numbers that used to mean birthday cards that arrived exactly on time, graduation gifts with cards that said, "We're so proud." The intricate web of obligation and debt and expectation and duty that people call love when they don't have better language, when they haven't learned yet that love and control are not the same thing, that care and consumption are different, that family and safety should not be mutually exclusive. There was a locksmith's invoice, crisp and official, preserved in a clear plastic sleeve in what I'd begun calling my documentation folder, which sounds paranoid and excessive until you desperately need one, and then it sounds like the smartest thing you've ever done, like basic survival equipment. The invoice carried that distinctive smell of fresh laser printer toner, chemical and sharp and somehow reassuring in its officialness, and I'd used a thick black Sharpie permanent marker, the industrial kind that smells like it could remove paint, to redact my address right there at my kitchen counter, the afternoon it had been given to me. I'd stood there with that marker, drawing careful, heavy lines through the street number and apartment designation, and I'd felt both ridiculous and relieved. Ridiculous because this is what people do in spy movies, in witness protection programs, in situations that feel more dramatic than real life should be. Relieved because I was finally, actually, genuinely taking action, instead of just thinking about taking action, worrying about taking action, talking to my therapist about maybe someday taking action. Not because I was being melodramatic or paranoid or unreasonable, though I'd called myself all those things in my head 1,000 times, but because I'd learned, the way you learn not to touch hot stoves after you've been burned enough times, that safety isn't an emotion you chase with your feelings, isn't a state of mind you can achieve through positive thinking or therapy breakthroughs, or finally understanding why your parents are the way they are. Safety is a boundary you construct with your logistics, with your systems, with your paper trails, and your locked doors, and your carefully maintained distance. The receipt displayed, in that neutral professional font that computers use. Date, February 14th, 2026. Time, 3:15 p.m. Services rendered. 3 deadbolts installed, 1 wireless door sensor, security consultation. Total amount, $385. Paid in full, cash. That money represented almost an entire paycheck from my job at the hotel. It was money I didn't really have, money I'd had to borrow from my emergency fund, money that meant I'd be eating rice and beans for the next 2 weeks and walking to work instead of taking the bus. But it was also money I couldn't afford not to spend, because what's the point of having money in the bank if you don't feel safe enough to sleep in your own apartment? There was a gouge in my doorframe, a thin metallic scratch about 3 inches long, the kind that comes from someone using a screwdriver or a pry bar, or some other tool they absolutely should not have, should not be using on someone else's door, should not be using at all. When I'd asked my neighbor Mr. Chen, who lived 2 doors down with his college-age daughter Jenny and his extensive collection of jazz records that sometimes played softly through the walls on Sunday mornings, he'd mentioned seeing a woman he didn't recognize attempting to access my door around 8:30 in the evening 4 nights ago. "She claimed to be your sister," Mr. Chen had reported, his voice careful and measured, because he could sense something wrong in the architecture of the situation, could feel the danger even if he didn't know the specifics. I informed her I'd resided in this building for 18 months, same as you, And I'd never observed you with a sister, never seen anyone matching that description visit your apartment. I don't have a sister, I never have. I'm an only child, which I used to be sad about when I was younger, used to wish for siblings, but now I'm grateful for, because it means there's one less person involved in all of this, one less relationship to navigate or lose or grieve. But someone wanted access to my apartment badly enough to lie to my neighbors, to invent relationships, to stand in the hallway with a tool trying to force open a door that was locked for very good reasons. And that scratch on the doorframe was a sentence written in metal that declared, "We will find an entrance. We will find a way in. Your boundaries are suggestions we can ignore. Your locked door is just a problem we need to solve." And then there was the document that altered everything, the one that made all of this real in a way it hadn't been before, the one I kept returning to like people return to photographs of turning points in their lives, even though I understood intellectually that it was merely paper, merely bureaucracy, merely a form that had been processed in a government office where people consumed mediocre coffee from a break room pot and counted down the hours until their shifts ended and probably gave exactly zero thought to what these forms meant to the people whose lives they were documenting. A no-contact order. Those three words that sounded both dramatic and clinical, both like too much and not enough. Filed, it announced in the upper right corner, the stamp slightly askew, tilted maybe 5 degrees to the left, because whoever had stamped it was probably on their 100th document of the day and was tired and thinking about dinner or traffic or their kid's soccer game or literally anything except the meaning this stamp held for me, the way it represented the first time in my entire adult life I'd asked an institution to protect me from my own family. King County Superior Court. Case number followed by a string of digits that meant nothing to me, but everything to the system's machinery, to the databases that would now flag my parents' names if they ever tried to, I don't know, find out where I worked, or access my medical records, or do any of the 1,000 small invasions they'd been doing for years that suddenly had legal consequences. The stamp was rectangular and unremarkable, black ink on white paper, as plain and bureaucratic as oxygen, and precisely as necessary once you realize you've been suffocating for years, without naming it, without calling it what it is, without admitting that sometimes the people who gave you life are the same people you need legal protection from. This wasn't an obsessive ex-boyfriend who couldn't accept rejection, who showed up at your work with flowers and apologies and threats. This wasn't a stalker I'd encountered online in some chat room or dating app, some stranger with an unhealthy fixation. This wasn't a coworker who developed an inappropriate attachment, who made everyone at the office uncomfortable. This was my parents. My mother, who delivered me in a hospital in Portland 33 years ago on a Wednesday in September, when rain hammered the windows so hard the nurses complained about the flooding in the parking lot, who'd held me when I was minutes old, who'd fed me and clothed me and kept me alive through childhood. My father, technically my stepfather, but the only father I'd ever known, who'd come into my life when I was 7 years old, who'd taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels in the parking lot of our apartment complex, who'd taught me how to change a flat tire when I was 16, because every woman should know how to take care of her own car, who'd taught me how to make myself very, very small when his voice started escalating, when the anger began rising, when the air in the house changed texture and temperature, and everyone started walking on eggshells and speaking in careful, quiet voices. This was family, the people society insists should constitute your first safety net, your unconditional support system, the people who are supposed to love you no matter what, the people who know you better than anyone, the people whose love you shouldn't have to earn or maintain or protect yourself from. And I was 33 years old enough to have a career and a mortgage and kids of my own if I'd wanted those things, and I had just filed legal documentation with a superior court to maintain distance from them, to make it a crime for them to contact me, to turn my family relationships into a matter for police and judges and restraining orders. And I was only beginning to comprehend, really understand in my bones, and not just intellectually, that sometimes love requires a no-contact order. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, and maybe even for them, is to build a legal wall and say, This far and no further. These are the consequences. This is what happens when boundaries are repeatedly violated. This is what protection looks like when asking nicely has failed for 3 decades. The day before that 5:47 a.m. message arrived, when I still harbored a small, flickering hope that the pause might hold, that maybe this time would be different, when I still believed somewhere deep down that structure could repair what emotions had shattered, I had transmitted an email. I'd spent the entire previous evening working on it, writing and deleting and rewriting, staring at the screen until my eyes burned, trying to find words that were both kind and immovable, gentle and absolute, warm and firm, trying to thread a needle that might not even have thread or eye, or any way to be threaded at all. I titled it the only honest way I understood. Meeting Guidelines, Connection Not Access. I'd invested 90 minutes on that subject line alone, typing and deleting and typing again, trying to find words that would communicate exactly what I meant, that would set the frame before they even opened the email, that would make it clear this wasn't an invitation back into unlimited access to my life and time and energy and emotional capacity, but rather a very specific, very limited, very boundaried offer of minimal connection if they could follow very clear rules. Meeting guidelines. Because this wasn't about re-establishing our old relationship, wasn't about going back to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations and pretending the past 3 years of hell hadn't happened. Connection, not access, because I was willing to connect as two human beings might connect briefly and superficially, but I was not willing to provide access to my life, my home, my schedule, my decisions, my finances, my medical information, my relationships, my inner world, all the things they'd felt entitled to for my entire existence. The body of the email was straightforward, at least in structure, if not in emotional weight. 3 options presented cleanly. Starbucks, the location on Broadway that I'd scouted the week before. The one with large windows so I could see anyone approaching. The one that maintained steady traffic during midday hours so I wouldn't be alone with them in an empty space. The one with multiple exits and a bathroom I could escape to if I needed a moment to breathe or cry or pull myself together. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a time when I'd be alert and caffeinated and functional, not groggy in the morning or exhausted in the evening. Wednesday or Friday of the subsequent week, giving them options but not unlimited options, not whenever works for you, but a choice between 2 specific days that worked for my schedule. 25 minutes precisely, not half an hour, not, let's just see how it goes, but 25 minutes with a clear start time and a clear end time that I would enforce regardless of how the conversation was going, regardless of whether we were in the middle of something, regardless of whether they were upset about me leaving. 25 minutes because that was survivable. I could do 25 minutes. I could maintain my boundaries for 25 minutes. I could keep my voice steady and my responses measured for 25 minutes. Longer than that, and I started to slip, started to fall back into old patterns, started to forget why I'd left in the first place. Public venue exclusively. Not their house. Not my apartment. Not a neutral location like a relative's house or their church or anywhere that would have emotional weight or history or people who might try to pressure me or create a scene or make me feel guilty for enforcing my boundaries. Starbucks, public, anonymous. A place where we were just 2 customers among dozens, where the baristas didn't know our history, where I could leave at any moment without having to navigate anyone else's feelings about it. I articulated the purpose in a single word that felt both generous and terrifying. Check-in. Not reconciliation, because I wasn't ready to reconcile, and might never be ready, and didn't owe them reconciliation just because they were my parents, and society said family should reconcile. Not explanation, because I didn't owe them an explanation for my boundaries, and trying to explain would just turn into me defending myself and them attacking every point, and nothing would be resolved. Not therapy session, because I wasn't their therapist, and it wasn't my job to fix their feelings or help them understand or facilitate their healing process. Just check in. Brief, superficial. Present tense only. Like you might do with an old acquaintance you hadn't seen in a while. Casual and boundaried and survivable. I included 2 rules, and I agonized over these rules for hours, Because rules sound harsh until you realize they're actually mercy. They're the framework that prevents you from having to make hundreds of decisions in the moment when your nervous system is screaming alarm and your old training is trying to take over and your hands are shaking and you can't think straight. Rule 1. No history. We would not excavate the past. We would not litigate who said what when, or who harmed whom more, or who was more wrong, or who was more hurt, or whose feelings mattered more. We would not replay old arguments or rehash old grievances or try to get the other person to finally understand our perspective or finally admit they were wrong or finally apologize in exactly the right way. We would exist exclusively in present tense for 25 minutes. We would talk about surface things, weather, books, work in the most general terms, neutral topics that didn't require us to process decades of dysfunction. No history, because every time I'd tried to talk about the past with them, it had turned into hours of circular arguments where I left feeling worse than when I'd started, feeling crazy, feeling like maybe I had imagined everything, maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I was being unfair, maybe I was the problem after all. Rule 2. If volume increases, we pause. Not if someone yells, because yelling is obvious and recognizable, and by the time someone is yelling, it's already too late. The boundary has already been violated. The damage has already been done. If volume increases at all, if I detect voices rising even slightly, if I sense manipulation beginning, or pressure mounting, or that particular tone creeping into the conversation that signals an incoming guilt operation, we terminate the meeting immediately. I stand up and leave, and we don't attempt again for 16 days minimum. 16 days, I'd learned from my therapist Sam, who I'd been seeing for 2 years, is sufficient time for a nervous system to settle from activation back to baseline. Long enough that the acute stress response has time to cycle through and resolve, but brief enough that it doesn't register as total abandonment to the person on the receiving end, doesn't feel like you've disappeared forever, doesn't trigger their attachment panic in a way that makes them escalate further. I offered them sentences simple enough for a child to comprehend, because complicated boundaries are simply excuses to violate boundaries. Because the more complex you make the rules, the easier it is for someone to claim they didn't understand, or they forgot, or they interpreted it differently. Simple is enforceable. Simple is clear. Simple doesn't leave room for debate or negotiation or creative reinterpretation. And I offered them a structure rigid enough that my attorney, David Park, the man who straightens his legal pad exactly 3 times against whatever surface he's writing on before he commits pen to paper, like he's aligning the universe and making sure everything is square and proper before documenting reality, rigid enough that David would approve, would nod and say, "That's enforceable, that's clear, that would hold up if you needed it to." You see, I had learned something in the previous 8 months of therapy and legal consultations and support groups and late-night conversations with the few friends who'd stuck around through all of this. Something I wish someone had taught me when I was 19 and first trying to set boundaries with my parents and failing spectacularly. Love without logistics transforms into weather. It becomes this unpredictable, uncontrollable force that batters you around, knocks you down, leaves you disoriented and dizzy and not sure which way is up, and you expend all your energy simply attempting to remain upright, simply trying to survive the storm, instead of actually living your existence, instead of building anything, instead of moving forward in any meaningful way. Love with logistics, love with terms and times, and public places, and explicit ending points, love with structure and boundaries, and consequences for violations. That variety of love you can survive. That variety of love might even be sustainable. That variety of love might allow you to stay in someone's life without losing yourself entirely, without setting yourself on fire to keep them warm, without sacrificing your own mental health and safety and peace and future on the altar of family obligation. That morning, the morning I now think of as Threshold Day, the morning everything changed, or began to change, or at least felt like it might be possible for things to change, I stood before my bathroom mirror, the one that's slightly too high, because this apartment was clearly designed by someone taller than me, the one that has a hairline crack running through the lower left corner from when I'd slammed the medicine cabinet too hard during a panic attack 6 months ago. I stood there in my pajamas with my hair unbrushed and my face unwashed, and I practiced 3 sentences. I spoke them aloud, which felt absurd and melodramatic, and also necessary, because your mouth requires knowledge of word shapes before your heart must deploy them under pressure. Because you can't learn to say hard things in hard moments. You have to practice them in easy moments so they're available to you when you need them. I observed my lips moving in the mirror. I listened to my voice, attempting to maintain it steady, trying not to let it shake or crack or rise in pitch the way it does when I'm scared. I was attempting to locate what Mrs. Okafor, my neighbor, who'd become something like a mentor or a mother figure or just a safe adult presence in my life, what she called my kitchen voice. Not my scared voice, not my defensive voice, not my apologetic voice. My kitchen voice. The one that's warm but firm. The one that doesn't invite debate because it's not interested in argument. The one that simply states facts the way you'd state that the library closes at 8, or that these shoes cost $40, or that parking is not permitted in this zone. Secure. I'm protected, and I have systems established. Not, I'm trying to be safe, or I hope I'm okay, or please don't hurt me. But, I'm protected. Present tense. Statement of fact. I have systems established. Not systems I'm thinking about, not systems I wish I had, but systems that exist right now, that are already in place, that are already functioning. Boundary. I'm working and documenting everything. We can meet in public spaces exclusively. This was the term sentence, the one that laid out what was possible and what wasn't. I'm working meant I have a job, I have structure in my life, I have somewhere to be and things to do, and I'm not available for unlimited emotional labor or crisis management or showing up to family emergencies that aren't actually emergencies. Documenting everything meant there's a paper trail. There are records, there are logs, and emails and files, and if this goes to court or to family therapy or anywhere else, I have evidence, I have proof. I'm not relying on memory or feelings, or he said, she said. We can meet in public spaces exclusively meant no, you cannot come to my apartment. No, I will not come to your house. No, we will not meet anywhere private where I might feel trapped or unsafe or unable to leave, where there might not be witnesses, where the rules might slip because we're in a familiar environment and old patterns are easier to fall into. Limit. I don't engage in arguments on the phone or at my door, period. This was the consequent sentence, the one that said, what happens if you violate the boundaries? Not, please don't argue with me, or, I'd prefer if we didn't argue, but I don't engage. Full stop. Period. End of sentence. If you try to argue with me on the phone, I will hang up. If you show up at my door trying to have a conversation I didn't agree to, I will not open the door. These aren't threats. These are just facts about what happens next. Secure, boundary, limit. I abbreviated it in my mind to SBL, 3 letters I could remember even when I was frightened, even when my hands were trembling, even when that old voice in my head, the one that sounds suspiciously like my mother's voice, was trying to convince me I was being cruel or dramatic, or unreasonably sensitive, or a bad daughter, or selfish, or any of the 1,000 other things it whispers when I try to protect myself. By the time I walked into that Starbucks at 12:52 in the afternoon, 8 minutes early instead of right on time, because arriving late felt like surrendering control before I even sat down, felt like starting from a position of weakness, those 3 sentences lived somewhere deeper than memory. They lived in my bones. They lived in my muscle memory. They lived in the place where reflexes reside, where you don't have to think consciously, you just know, your body knows, your mouth knows what to say, even when your brain is offline with fear. I selected a table near the window, where I could observe both the entrance and the large clock mounted on the wall above the pastry display case. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't being dramatic. My therapist, Sam, had explained this to me, had articulated it in language that made me feel less crazy, less broken, more like someone reasonably responding to an unreasonable situation. People healing from control require visibility of their exits and their time limits. It's not paranoia when there's actual danger, it's just good preparation. If I couldn't observe the door, if my back was to the entrance, some portion of my brain, the ancient lizard brain that's in charge of survival, would remain in panic mode the entire duration. I'd be scanning constantly, unable to focus on the conversation, unable to be present. My nervous system stuck in that state of high alert, waiting for danger to appear from behind me. I'd be vigilant and exhausted, and unable to actually connect with anything being said, because all my energy would be going into that background scanning process. If I couldn't see a clock, if I had to keep checking my phone for the time would become elastic and frightening. It would either stretch endlessly, where 25 minutes felt like 3 hours, and I'd be trapped in an eternal conversation that would never end, or it would evaporate too rapidly, where suddenly 45 minutes had passed, and I'd lost track and violated my own boundary. And now I was in that familiar place of not knowing when I was allowed to leave, or how to extract myself without causing a scene. I positioned my index card on the table between the napkin dispenser and my water glass, and that card contained my 3 sentences written in black gel pen, my handwriting deliberate and clear, not rushed or sloppy but careful, legible, like I was writing a prescription for my own survival, like these words were medicine I might need to reference while I was here. Secure, I'm protected. Boundary, I meet in public by appointment exclusively. Limit, I don't argue at the door or on the phone. I wasn't inviting a rescue. I wasn't begging for understanding or waiting for someone to swoop in and save me, or hoping they'd finally see my perspective and apologize for everything. And we'd have that tearful reconciliation scene you see in movies, where everyone hugs and cries, and all the pain dissolves into forgiveness and healing. I was establishing terms. I was laying down the framework. I was saying, here is what's possible. Here are the conditions under which contact can occur. Here is the structure that makes this survivable for me. If they appeared and followed the structure, we would utilize those 25 minutes to determine if any kind of connection was possible, if there was any version of a relationship we could build that didn't require me to sacrifice my mental health and safety. If they didn't appear, or if they appeared and violated the rules, the clock would still belong to me, the boundary would still hold, and I would return home and prepare soup the way Mrs. Okafor had taught me, because soup is what you consume when you need to mother yourself. When you need something warm in a bowl, you can cradle with both hands. When you need to feel cared for, and you're the only one available to do the caring. People enjoy telling you that family is a feeling, this warm and comforting thing that lives in your heart and transcends all difficulties, all harm, all history. Family is unconditional, they declare with confidence, like that's automatically virtuous, like conditions are somehow cruel or calculating instead of necessary and reasonable. They say family forgives everything, family accepts you no matter what, family is the one constant you can rely on, family is forever, blood is thicker than water, you only get one family so you better make it work. But sitting in that Starbucks in Seattle, Washington, on a Wednesday in February, with the lunch crowd beginning to filter in, and the familiar smell of coffee competing with toasted sandwiches, with rain streaking down the windows, and the steam from the espresso machine creating a kind of ambient noise that was both comforting and isolating, I learned something that felt both obvious and revolutionary, both simple and profound. Family is also a form. It's not just a feeling. It's not just a biological fact. It's a structure you either construct intentionally, with thought and care and explicit agreements and clear boundaries, or you inherit accidentally, this default setting that gets installed when you're born, these patterns and rules and obligations that get passed down through generations without anyone ever examining them or questioning whether they actually work or whether they're causing harm. And if that inherited version, that default setting, is attempting to kill you slowly, eroding your sense of self day by day, until you can't remember who you were before you learn to shrink, before you learn to anticipate their moods, before you learn to make yourself small and quiet and acceptable, if it's costing you your mental health and your relationships and your career prospects and your ability to sleep through the night, you possess every right in the world to file new documentation, to opt out of the default settings, to build something different, even if that something different looks nothing like what family is supposed to look like. The morning of what would eventually become the first proper test of my boundaries, though I didn't know it yet as I stood in the shower, letting hot water run over my shoulders and trying to wash away the anxiety, the email response came. 3 days after I'd sent my carefully crafted meeting guidelines, 3 days during which I'd checked my email obsessively despite telling myself I wouldn't, despite setting those designated communication windows, despite all my systems and structures and good intentions, the response finally arrived at 11:23 p.m. on a Friday night. The timing alone told me everything about the state of mind it was written in. Friday night, late, when rational thinking gives way to emotion, when boundaries feel less important than feelings, when the urgency of connection overwhelms the patience required by structure. The subject line said simply, "Meeting guidelines." And when I opened it with shaking hands, sitting on my couch in my pajamas, with chamomile tea going cold on the side table, I found exactly 4 sentences. "This is ridiculous. We're your parents. We don't need an appointment to see our own daughter. Call us tomorrow." No purpose, no options, no attendees, no acknowledgement of the structure I'd requested, the format I'd outlined, the boundaries I'd drawn. Just 4 sentences that said, in essence, "We refuse to follow your terms, and we expect you to fold." Just 4 sentences that dismissed everything I'd carefully built, that treated my needs as negotiable, that assumed I would cave under the pressure of their disapproval, and their confusion, and their hurt feelings. I stared at that email for probably 3 full minutes, feeling that old familiar pull, that trained response that wanted me to explain and justify and defend and persuade. The old version of me, the one who'd spent 30 years trying to be good enough, would have written back immediately with a 1,000-word explanation about why I needed these boundaries, detailing all the harm that had been done, listing every incident and every hurt, making my case like I was presenting evidence to a jury, trying to make them understand, trying to get them to see, trying to win an argument that could never be won because they fundamentally didn't want to see things from my perspective. The new version of me, the one I was building slowly and painfully with Sam's help, and Mrs. Okafor's help, and David's help, and Jennifer the librarian's help, and the help of women in online forums who'd walked this road before me, that version of me did something different. Something that felt both cruel and necessary, both cold and self-preserving. I moved the email to my unscheduled folder without replying. I opened my composition notebook, the one with the black and white mottled cover that I used for logging all boundary violations, and I wrote in careful block letters, legal _02 T21 26 _2323 _email response, received comma, no compliance with format comma, moved to unscheduled comma, no reply, sent comma, 16-day pause, initiated period. Then I did something that felt both petty and powerful, both small and significant. I opened my calendar app and I set a reminder for exactly 16 days in the future, March 9th, 2026, with a note attached that said simply, "Pause ends. Can send reset template if desired." 16 days. Not as punishment, not to hurt them, not to prove a point or win a power struggle. 16 days as recovery time. 16 days for both of our nervous systems to settle down from activation back to baseline. 16 days to see if they would learn that the structure was real, that the terms weren't negotiable, that I meant what I said, and would follow through with consequences when boundaries were violated. I didn't reply to that email. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't send a follow-up message explaining why I wasn't responding, or defending my decision, or outlining the reasoning behind the 16-day pause. I just let the silence be my answer. Let the absence of response speak for itself. Let the structure do what structure does. Hold the boundary firm regardless of how I felt emotionally, regardless of guilt or fear or doubt, or the voice in my head saying I was being too harsh, too rigid, too unforgiving. And I went to bed. And remarkably, surprisingly, I slept better than I had in weeks, because I had followed my own system. I had kept my own boundary. I had done what I said I would do, which was the hardest part, and also the most important part. The boundary wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't something I wished I could enforce or plan to enforce someday. It was real. It was functioning. It was doing its job whether they cooperated or not. The next morning, Saturday, at 7:15 a.m., there was a knock on my door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor or a delivery person. Not the perfunctory knock of someone who expects you might not be home. The insistent knock of someone who expects the door to open, who feels entitled to entry, who believes their desire to see you overrides your clearly stated boundary about no unannounced visits. I was making coffee, still in my pajamas, my hair in a messy bun, and the knock made me freeze mid-motion, the coffee scoop suspended over the filter, my entire body suddenly alert in that way that happens when your nervous system recognizes a threat before your conscious mind has fully processed what's happening. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, wearing that particular expression she gets when she's performing concern, when she's playing the role of the worried mother who just wants to help, who just wants to make sure her daughter is eating properly. My heart started racing immediately, that familiar acceleration from 0 to panic in under 3 seconds, and I felt my hand actually reach toward the doorknob before my brain caught up and stopped it. I stepped back from the door. I pulled out my phone and I opened the Notes app, where I'd saved my emergency protocol, the step-by-step guide that Sam and I had written together, the script I could follow when my thinking brain had gone offline and my body was running on pure stress hormones and old training. I read it once, slowly, deliberately, letting the words sink in and override the panic and the guilt and the pull to just open the door and accept the casserole and make her feel better, because that's what good daughters do. Then I spoke toward the door, not opening it, not even touching the knob, keeping my voice level and clear even though my hands were shaking. I'm secure. I meet in public by appointment only. Please email purpose and options. My mother's voice came through the door, wounded and confused, perfectly calibrated to maximize my guilt. Honey, it's Mom. I brought you that chicken casserole you always loved, the one with the cream of mushroom soup. Can you just open the door for 1 minute? I'm worried about you. You're not eating enough, I can tell. Just let me give you this and I'll go. 1 minute, that's all I'm asking. I felt everything in me want to open that door, want to take the casserole because she'd driven all the way here, and she'd cooked it, and she was just trying to help. And what kind of person rejects homemade food from their mother? What kind of ungrateful daughter won't even open the door for 1 minute? But I'd learned, slowly and painfully, that casseroles aren't just casseroles in dysfunctional families. They're entry points. They're ways of saying the rules don't apply to us because we're family, because we mean well, because we're just trying to show we care. They're ways of testing whether the boundary is real or if it will crumble under the weight of guilt and obligation and the appearance of kindness. So I repeated my statement, exactly as I'd practiced it with Sam, exactly as I'd written it down, word for word without deviation. I meet in public by appointment only. Please email purpose and options. This is insane, my mother said. And there it was, that shift in volume that Sam had warned me about, that escalation that meant we were heading into manipulation territory. I drove 40 minutes to bring you food, and you won't even open the door? What have they done to you? Is it that therapist? Did she tell you to treat your mother this way? I gave birth to you. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. And you can't open the door for 1 minute? I didn't respond. Sam had drilled this into me during our practice sessions in the back hallway at work, making me practice over and over. Don't engage with the content of what they're saying. Don't defend your therapist. Don't explain your reasoning. Don't argue about whether it's insane or not. Don't respond to guilt trips or manipulation, or the listing of everything they've done for you. Just hold the line. Just let the silence do its work. Just trust the structure to hold even when your heart is screaming at you to fix this, to make her feel better, to be the good daughter you've been trained to be. I stood 3 feet back from my door, my phone in my hand with the timer app open, documenting how long this lasted, recording the time and the fact of the visit, even though I wasn't recording the actual conversation, because Washington is a 2-party consent state and I couldn't legally record audio without her knowledge. But I could document the facts: date, time, duration, Basic summary of what happened. My response. The outcome. Fine, my mother said, after about 2 minutes of me standing there silently, after she'd tried several more versions of the same manipulation, several more ways of making me wrong for having boundaries, several more attempts to make me feel guilty enough to open the door. Fine, I'll leave it here at the door. But when you're ready to stop this nonsense and act like an adult, you know where to find us. I can't believe I raised a daughter who would treat her mother like this. I heard her set something down outside my door. I heard her footsteps walking away down the hallway, angry footsteps, the kind that put extra force into each step to make sure I could hear her displeasure, to make sure I knew she was upset, to make one last attempt at making me feel bad enough that I'd come running after her. I waited 5 full minutes, counting them slowly on my phone timer, before I looked through the peephole again. She was gone. There was a casserole dish sitting on my doormat, foil-covered, probably still warm. I didn't open the door. I didn't retrieve the casserole. Instead, I texted my building manager, a man named Rick, who I'd spoken to when I first filed the no-contact order, who I'd asked to put a note in my file about my situation, so he'd understand if strange things started happening. Someone left food outside my apartment. I have a no-contact order. Can you please remove it? I don't want it, and I didn't request it. Thank you. 10 minutes later, Rick texted back. Removed. I'll hold it at the front desk for 24 hours in case you change your mind. Then I'll dispose of it. You okay? I replied, yes, thank you. Just following my safety plan. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, and that was it. Simple, professional, boundary maintained. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, my coffee finally made and already going lukewarm, because 20 minutes had passed since I'd started making it, and I documented everything while it was fresh, while my memory was clear and unfiltered by time, or second-guessing, or the voice that would inevitably start telling me maybe I overreacted, maybe I should have just taken the casserole. Time, 7:15 a.m. Duration, approximately 7 minutes based on my timer. What was said? I wrote out the basic content of the conversation, the manipulation attempts, the guilt trips, the escalation in volume. What I did. Stated SBL through closed door twice, did not open door at any point, did not engage in argument or explanation, requested building manager remove item left at door. How I felt. I let myself write this part honestly because I needed to acknowledge it even if I didn't act on it. Shaky, guilty, like a terrible daughter, like I was being unnecessarily cruel, but also proud that I held the line and didn't let guilt override my boundary. I photographed the page. I emailed it to myself with the subject line, legal_2222-6_0715_unscheduled door visit attempt. I saved it as a PDF with that exact file name. I copied it to my backup USB drive. Then I texted Sam, my coworker, who'd become one of my most crucial supports. Boundary tested this morning. Held. Felt awful, but held. She replied 30 seconds later, even though it was barely 7:45 on a Saturday morning, and she was probably still in bed. That's the work. Awful means it's real, means you're doing something your old training doesn't want you to do. Proud of you. That took guts. I sat there with my cooling coffee, and I let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes, which I timed on my phone because I'd learned that giving grief a container, giving it a defined beginning and end, kept it from consuming my entire day. 10 minutes to feel the feelings. The guilt, the sadness, the grief for the mother I wished I had, the grief for the relationship I wanted but couldn't have safely, the loss of the fantasy that maybe this time would be different. 10 minutes, and then I washed my face, made fresh coffee, and moved on with my day because life doesn't stop just because your boundaries are being tested. The 16-day pause that I'd initiated wasn't peaceful. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't a respectful silence where both sides gave each other space to process and reset. It was tested repeatedly, relentlessly, in ways that ranged from gentle to aggressive, from sad to manipulative, from confused to angry. Let me walk you through those 16 days, the way lawyers love to see information, and the way nervous systems desperately need information, which turns out to be the same way. day by day, fact by fact, with documentation instead of interpretation. Day 1, Saturday. The door incident I just described. Documented. Building manager notified. Casserole removed and disposed of by staff. Boundary held. I spent the rest of the day doing ordinary things on purpose. Laundry at the building's laundry room. Grocery shopping at the store 3 blocks away. Meal prep for the week ahead, so I'd have easy food available when I was too tired or stressed to cook. Boring felt like medicine when my nervous system was screaming. Boring felt like rebellion against the drama they wanted me to participate in. Day 2, Sunday. Text message from my father at 6:45 a.m., before I was even properly awake, designed to catch me when my defenses were down. Your mother is very hurt by how you treated her yesterday. This has gone too far. I'm coming over this afternoon at 2 so we can talk like adults and sort this out. Not a request. A declaration. An assumption that his decision to show up would override my boundary about appointments being required. I moved the text to my unscheduled folder. I didn't reply immediately, even though everything in me wanted to fire back with, "No, you're not," or "I told you the rules," or launch into an explanation or defense. Instead, I waited until my 8 a.m. communication window. Then I replied with a message I'd pre-written and saved in my Notes app for exactly this scenario. I meet in public by appointment only. Please email purpose and 2 options using the format I provided. Text messages announcing unscheduled visits will not result in meetings. He didn't come over. The threat, like most threats from people who are used to controlling through fear and obligation, evaporated when met with structure instead of emotion. When I didn't argue, when I didn't defend, when I didn't give him anything to push against, there was nothing for him to do except either follow the format or give up for the moment. Day 3, Monday. Email from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, someone who'd barely acknowledged my existence for the past 5 years, until suddenly I became the family crisis. I don't know what's going on between you and your parents, but family is family. Whatever happened, you need to forgive them. They're getting older. They won't be around forever. Life is too short to hold grudges. I'm sure if you just sat down and talked it out like mature adults, you could work through whatever this is. Your mother is heartbroken. Your father is losing weight from stress. Is this really what you want? To destroy your family over some disagreement? This is what they call triangulation in therapy and legal terms. Using a third party to apply pressure, to make you feel guilty, to get around your direct boundary by coming at you from a different angle. It's like putting a fence around your property to keep someone out, and they send their friend to your back door instead. Same violation, different route. I didn't reply to Aunt Linda. I didn't explain my boundaries or justify my decisions or try to make her understand that this wasn't about grudges or disagreements, that this was about safety and mental health and years of harm that couldn't be resolved by just talking. Instead, I created a new folder in my email called Third Party Contact. I moved her email there. I documented it in my log. Legal_02 1024 tuned 6 underscore email from Aunt Linda, triangulation attempt, no reply sent, filed under third-party contact. David, my attorney, had explained to me that documenting third-party contact was important because it showed a pattern of trying to circumvent the no-contact order, showed that they were deliberately involving others to maintain access to me despite clear boundaries. Each incident by itself might seem minor, might seem like just family members being concerned. But documented over time, they formed a pattern that could be useful if I ever needed to go back to court to request stricter enforcement or to address violations. Day 4, Tuesday. Nothing. Silence. And somehow the silence felt worse than the contact, felt like the eye of a hurricane, like that moment of eerie calm that means the worst part is still coming. I worked my regular shift at the hotel, helped Sam set up for a conference of insurance adjusters, made small talk with coworkers about normal things like the rain and the weekend, and someone's cat who'd gotten stuck behind the refrigerator. Normal felt like a foreign country I was visiting, a place where people didn't have to document their interactions with their parents, or keep logs of boundary violations, or wonder when the next test would come. Day 5, Wednesday. At work, during the lunch service when we were busy, and I was focused on making sure the buffet line stayed full and the coffee urns were fresh, the front desk called down to the kitchen. I was in the middle of restocking the pastry display when Sam answered. I saw her glance at me, saw something shift in her face, and she said into the phone, "Sorry, I can't confirm or deny any employee information. If you need to contact someone, I'd suggest trying email. Thank you." She hung up. After service, when we were in the back hallway doing our usual cleanup and debrief, Sam pulled me aside. "Woman called asking for you by name. Said she was your aunt. Said she had something important to tell you about a family emergency. I gave her the policy line we discussed. Wanted you to know so you weren't surprised if it escalates. Boundary held by someone else, on my behalf. Because I'd told Sam what was happening, and she'd decided to be part of my protective system. She hadn't asked me for my whole story. She hadn't needed to understand all the details or have the complete history. She'd just asked me one question. What do you need me to do if they contact you here? And I'd given her a script, and she'd followed it, and now my workplace was protected too. Thank you, I said, and I meant it with my whole chest. That's exactly right. I appreciate you having my back. That's what we do here, Sam said, like it was obvious. Like of course we protected each other. Like that was just how functional teams operated. And I realized with a small jolt that this was what healthy relationships looked like. People who respected your boundaries without needing to fully understand them, who supported your safety without requiring your trauma as payment, who did what they said they'd do without making it into a big emotional production. Day 6, Thursday. Package delivered to my apartment. No return address, which immediately made me suspicious. Inside, 3 framed photographs from my childhood, carefully bubble-wrapped, and a note on floral stationery that said in my mother's handwriting, "These belong to you. I've been saving them all these years. Please come get the rest of your things from your old room before we clean it out. We won't keep them forever. It would be a shame if these memories got thrown away." I recognized the manipulation immediately because Mrs. Okafor and I had literally just discussed this tactic 2 days ago during one of our tea sessions on her couch. "They'll try to create urgency around things that aren't actually urgent," she'd said. "They'll manufacture deadlines and consequences for not responding. Come get your things or we'll throw them away. Call back today or something bad will happen." It's all designed to make you react instead of respond, to make you move on their timeline instead of yours. I took photographs of the note and the package label and the contents before I touched anything, before I unwrapped anything, because David had taught me to document first, react later. Then I stored the photographs, still in their bubble wrap, unopened, in the back of my closet. I didn't hang them up. I didn't look at them longingly. I didn't let them become an emotional trigger that would weaken my resolve. They were just objects, just photographs, just things that could be dealt with later, or not at all, depending on what I decided when I was ready to decide. I filed the documentation. Legal_0227_226 received comma contents. Documented comma note, photographed comma storage location noted. The note about getting the rest of my things before we clean out your room, I recognized it for what it was. Manufactured urgency designed to make me engage, designed to create a reason I'd have to contact them or visit them or break my boundary. My old room had been gone for 8 years, since they'd converted it into my father's home office. There were no things waiting for me. This was bait. I didn't respond. I didn't take the bait. I let the deadline they'd invented pass without acknowledgement. Day 7, Friday. Text from my cousin Rebecca at 10:30 p.m., late enough that I was already in bed reading, trying to wind down for sleep. "Hey, haven't talked to you in forever. Want to get coffee this weekend? Would be good to catch up." On the surface, innocent. Just a cousin wanting to reconnect. But Rebecca and I hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not since she'd sided with my parents during an argument. Not since she'd told me I was being dramatic and ungrateful. And the timing, right in the middle of this boundary campaign, was too convenient to be coincidental. I replied. But I replied with clarity and a boundary. "Hi, Rebecca. I'm not available this weekend. If you'd like to reconnect at some point, I'm open to that. But I need to let you know I have some family boundaries in place right now, and I won't be discussing my parents or my relationship with them. If that works for you, I'd enjoy catching up in a few weeks when my schedule opens up. She never replied. The coffee invitation wasn't about coffee. It was about accessing me on behalf of my parents, about being a messenger or a mediator or a spy or whatever role they'd asked her to play. When I made it clear that I wouldn't be discussing them, when I removed the actual purpose of her reaching out, there was nothing left to say. The friendship, if it had ever really been a friendship, didn't survive the boundary. I logged it. I felt sad about it. I didn't change my boundary because of the sadness. Day 8, Saturday. I worked a double shift by choice, because being busy felt better than being alone with my thoughts, because the kitchen at the hotel was predictable and structured and had clear metrics for success and failure. Orders came in, food went out, customers were fed, shift ended. Simple, manageable. A world where following the recipe produced reliable results. During my dinner break, Sam and I sat on our overturned milk crates in the back hallway, and she asked me how I was holding up. I told her honestly, I feel like a terrible person. I feel cruel. I feel like I'm the one causing all this pain. Like if I would just be reasonable and forgive them and let them see me, none of this drama would be happening. Like I'm the problem. Sam looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I've written down and read probably 500 times since. Something that fundamentally changed how I understood what I was doing. You're not causing pain. You're refusing to manage their pain for them. That's different. Their pain is real. Their feelings are real. But it's not your job to fix those feelings by setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. It's not your job to sacrifice your safety and mental health to make them feel better about losing control over you. She paused, made sure I was really hearing her. They're in pain because they're losing something they had. Access to you, control over you, the version of you that did what they wanted. That loss is painful for them. But you didn't cause that pain by leaving. You caused it by refusing to stay in a situation that was hurting you. Those are two completely different things, even though they feel the same to them. I cried in that hallway, sitting on a milk crate that smelled like industrial cleaner, while Sam sat next to me and didn't try to fix it or make it better or tell me not to cry. She just sat there, solid and present, until I was done. Then she handed me a clean kitchen towel to dry my face and said, "You're doing the right thing. It doesn't feel like it, because the right thing is hard as hell. But you're doing it." Day 9, Sunday. Email from my mother, with the subject line, "Please." Just that one word, designed to pull on my heartstrings, designed to make me feel like a monster for not responding. Inside, the email was longer, more elaborate, more carefully crafted than the previous attempts. I don't understand what we did wrong. I don't understand why you hate us so much. I gave you life. I raised you the best I knew how. I sacrificed everything for you, gave up my career, my friends, my own needs to make sure you had everything you needed. And this is how you repay me? With silence? With refusing to even let me give you food? If you won't talk to us, at least tell us what we did so we can apologize and fix it. This silence is killing your father. His blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says the stress is dangerous. Is this what you want? To literally kill your father with stress? Please, sweetheart, just tell me what to do to make this right. I'll do anything. Just please stop shutting us out. Every sentence was designed to pull on my guilt, my obligation, my fear. Every sentence was a hook. I gave you life. You owe me. I sacrificed everything. You're ungrateful. His blood pressure is through the roof. You're responsible for his health. This silence is killing your father. You're basically murdering him. I'll do anything, except, apparently, respect my boundaries, or follow my format, or acknowledge that my needs matter. I read it once. I felt the familiar pull, that undertow of guilt and obligation that had controlled me for 30 years. And then I did something that Mrs. Okafor had taught me, something that felt almost magical in its effectiveness. I copied the entire email into a document, and I changed every pronoun. Every I became they. Every you became I. Every your became my. And I read it again with those pronouns flipped. They don't understand what they did wrong. They don't understand why I hate them so much. They gave me life. They raised me the best they knew how. They sacrificed everything for me. When I read it with the pronouns reversed, I could see the manipulation more clearly. I could see how it was designed to make me responsible for their feelings, for their choices, for their relationship, for everything except my own safety and well-being. I moved it to the unscheduled folder. I documented it. Legal_030126 _email from mother, emotional manipulation, health threats, moved to unscheduled, no reply sent. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I let the structure hold me when my emotions wanted me to cave. Day 10. Monday. A letter arrived in my physical mailbox, handwritten, 6 pages long, front and back. I could see my mother's handwriting through the envelope, could see how the pages were filled with words, could imagine the hours she'd spent crafting this, the tears she'd probably cried while writing it, the hope she'd invested in the idea that this letter would be the thing that finally broke through my boundaries. I didn't read it. David had told me explicitly, clearly, in language that left no room for doubt. You don't have to consume everything they send just because they sent it. You get to decide what you let into your mind and heart. If opening that letter will hurt you, if it will weaken your resolve, if it will fill your head with their voice and their perspective and their guilt trips, you don't have to read it. You can document that you received it and store it unopened. That's allowed. That's not wrong. That's just protecting yourself. So I didn't read it. I photographed the envelope, front and back, to document the postmark and the date and the fact that I'd received it. Then I put the letter, unopened, still sealed, into a manila envelope that I labeled Unread Correspondence in thick black marker. I filed it in my documentation folder. Maybe someday I'd read it when I was stronger, when I had more distance, when I could read it without it destroying me. Maybe I wouldn't. That was a decision I could make later. Day 11, Tuesday. Mrs. Okafor knocked on my door at 7 p.m. with a pot of her homemade lentil soup and an invitation to sit on her couch and watch a British baking show and not talk about anything serious. I went. I ate soup that someone else had made for me with no strings attached, no hidden agenda, no expectation that I'd have to pay for it with emotional labor or compliance or giving up my boundaries. I watched people on TV make elaborate cakes and bread sculptures. I petted her enormous orange cat, who purred like a motor and had no opinions about my family drama. When I left 2 hours later, I felt more human than I had in days. This is what actual support looks like, what real care looks like. Someone showing up with soup and permission to be normal. Someone offering presence without requiring performance. Someone being kind without needing you to earn it, or deserve it, or repay it with compliance. "Thank you," I said at her door as I was leaving. "For soup?" she asked, smiling. "For not asking questions, for just being here. That's what neighbors do, dear. You'd do the same." And I realized she was right. I would. I had. This was what community looked like, what chosen family looked like. People who showed up for each other not because of blood or obligation, but because they decided to, because they'd chosen each other, because they were building something together that was based on mutual care instead of duty and guilt. Day 12, Wednesday. Text from my father at 9:15 a.m. The 16 days are almost up. What happens then? So he'd been counting. So they were aware of the structure, even if they weren't following it, even if they were testing it relentlessly. So the boundary was real to them, even if they didn't like it, even if they were fighting against it. I didn't reply, but internally I felt something shift. They were paying attention. They were tracking the timeline. The structure I'd built was making an impression, was creating consequences they couldn't ignore, was changing the dynamic even if they were resisting every step of the way. Day 13, Thursday. Nothing. Silence again. The quiet before the storm, or maybe just a moment of exhaustion on their part. A pause in the campaign, a temporary retreat to regroup and try a different strategy. Day 14, Friday. Email from my mother with proper structure for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Purpose, check-in, options, next Wednesday or Friday, 1 or 1:25, Starbucks on Broadway. Attendees, just me, your father will not attend. Notes, I understand no history, I will follow your rules. I stared at that email for probably 20 minutes. It had everything I'd asked for. It used the format exactly as I'd outlined it. It acknowledged the rules. It specified attendees. It gave me options. It was everything I'd said I needed, and yet I found myself terrified to say yes. Terrified that this was a trap. Terrified that the moment I agreed, they'd revert to the old patterns and I'd be right back where I started. I called Mrs. Okafor even though it was 8:30 on a Friday night. I need to read you something, I said, and I read her the email. What are you feeling? She asked. Scared. Like I want to say yes, but I'm terrified it's a trick. First compliance doesn't mean sustained compliance, she said, her voice steady and sure. But it does mean they're capable of following structure when they choose to. That's information. That's data. What do you want to do? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it would be different this time. I wanted to believe that 16 days had changed something, had made them understand that I was serious, that the boundaries were real. So I replied, carefully, with additional structure to protect myself. Friday, 1/1/25 works. Starbucks on Broadway. I'll bring my terms card. If volume increases or history is brought up, I'll leave immediately and we'll pause for another 16 days. I'll send a summary within 24 hours. Thank you for following the format. See you then. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I added an event to my calendar. Friday, 1 p.m., Starbucks on Broadway, mom only, 25 minutes maximum. And underneath that, in the notes field, I wrote, Bring terms card. Sit where you can see door and clock. Have exit line ready. I'm ending this meeting now. We can try again in 16 days. Document afterward. Text Sam and Mrs. Okafor after to close loop. Day 15, Saturday. I prepared like I was preparing for a job interview or a court appearance, because in a way, I was. This wasn't just coffee with my mother. This was the first real test of whether the structure could hold in person, whether the boundaries I'd drawn on paper could translate into actual behavior, whether I could enforce my limits in real time when my old training and guilt and fear were all activated at once. I practiced my SBL statement 20 times out loud in my apartment, until my voice sounded steady and clear and neutral, until it felt like something I could say even when my hands were shaking and my heart was racing. Secure, I'm protected. Boundary, I meet in public by appointment only. Limit, I don't engage in arguments on the phone or at my door. I practiced my exit line the same way. I'm ending this meeting now. We can try again in 16 days if you'd like to email new options. I wrote out my terms card fresh on a clean index card, making sure my handwriting was clear and legible. Secure, boundary, limit at the top. Then underneath, the rules for this specific meeting. 25 minutes maximum, no history. If volume increases, we pause for 16 days. Public place only. One summary email within 24 hours. I put the card in the back pocket of my jeans, where I could reach it easily if I needed to reference it, if I needed something solid to ground me. I chose my outfit carefully. Comfortable shoes in case I needed to walk out quickly, clothing with pockets for my phone and my cards and my keys, layers in case the coffee shop was too hot or too cold, clothes that made me feel like an adult in control of her own life, rather than a child being scolded. Small things, but they mattered. They helped me feel less vulnerable. I planned my arrival time. 12:50, 10 minutes early so I could claim the table I needed, the one with visibility to the door and the clock, the one that would let me sit with my back protected and my exits clear. I packed my bag the night before. Phone fully charged, portable charger just in case, my documentation folder with the no contact order in it, just in case things went badly enough that I needed to show someone, cash for my own coffee, because I would not let her pay for anything, because money is a boundary. Day 16, Sunday, the day before the meeting. I worked a morning shift at the hotel, came home, did meal prep for the week ahead, cleaned my apartment, did laundry, organized my documentation folder. All boring, normal tasks that kept my hands busy and my mind from spiraling. In the evening, I sat down with my journal, and I wrote something that surprised me. Whatever happens tomorrow, I've already won. I held 16 days of boundaries. I built a system that works. I proved to myself that I can keep my own limits even when it hurts, even when I feel guilty, even when everyone is telling me I'm wrong. Even if tomorrow goes badly, even if she violates every rule and I have to walk out in the first 5 minutes, I've already done the hardest part. I've already shown myself that I can do this. The morning of the meeting arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matches internal anxiety perfectly. I woke up at 6:30, earlier than my alarm, my body already preparing for threat, even though the meeting wasn't until 1:00. I made myself eat breakfast even though I wasn't hungry, because I'd learned that low blood sugar makes everything harder, makes it harder to think clearly and enforce boundaries and maintain my resolve. I showered and dressed in the outfit I'd chosen. I did my makeup, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because the ritual of it felt grounding, felt like putting on armor, felt like creating a barrier between my vulnerable self and the world. I got to Starbucks at 12:50 as planned. I ordered a tea I probably wouldn't drink but needed to hold, something to do with my hands, something that gave me a reason to be there. I claimed the table I'd scouted, the one near the window with clear sight lines, to both the entrance and the large clock on the wall. I set my index card on the table where I could see it, where my mother would see it too, where it would be a physical reminder of the structure we were operating within. I sent a quick text to Sam. At location. Meeting starts in 10 minutes. We'll text after. She replied immediately. You've got this. Exit line in your pocket. Door's always there if you need it. My mother arrived at 12:58. She was alone, as promised, which was already a departure from past patterns, where promises were suggestions and agreements were negotiable. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, like the 16 days had aged her visibly, like the stress of not having access to me had taken a physical toll. She paused when she saw the index card on the table, her eyes dropping to it and then back to my face, and something in her expression shifted. Not anger exactly, but resignation maybe, or recognition. This was real. The rules were real. I had actually meant what I said. Hi, she said, sitting down across from me. Hi, I said back. She looked at the card again. You really meant it, she said, and her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, smaller, almost defeated. All of it. The rules, the structure, the format. You really meant all of it. Yes, I said, keeping my voice level, keeping it in that kitchen register Mrs. Okafor and I had practiced. I really meant it. Okay, she said, and there was something in that word, some quality I couldn't quite identify. Not acceptance exactly, maybe just acknowledgement. Okay. 25 minutes. No history, I understand. We sat there for a moment in silence, and I realized this was the first time in my entire adult life that I'd been in my mother's presence and felt like I had any control over what happened next, like I had any agency in how the interaction would go. The card sat between us like a referee, like a neutral party that would enforce rules neither of us could break without consequence. How have you been? She asked, and it was such a normal question, such a surface-level thing to ask, that I almost laughed. I've been okay, I said, which was both true and not true, but we were staying in present tense. We were keeping it surface. Work's been busy. We had a big conference this week, 400 people. It went well. That's good, she said. That's really good. You always were good at organizing things, at making sure everything ran smoothly. We talked like that for a while, like acquaintances catching up, like people who knew each other slightly, but not deeply. She told me about her garden, about which plants had survived the winter, and which ones she'd have to replace in the spring. She told me about a book she was reading, a mystery novel someone in her book club had recommended. She asked if I was eating enough vegetables, which almost triggered me because it was such a mom thing to say, such a classic boundary violation disguised as care. But I let it go because it was said kindly, because her volume stayed level, because it felt more like genuine concern than manipulation. I told her about a promotion opportunity at work, about how Sam had recommended me for a scheduling coordinator position that would mean more money and more responsibility. I told her I was taking online classes, working slowly toward a business degree, one course at a time while working full-time. I told her about a book I'd read recently that I'd enjoyed, about the rain and the fact that spring was coming, and I was thinking about getting a plant for my apartment, something low maintenance that could survive my schedule. We talked about surfaces. We skated across the top of our lives without diving deep, without touching the wounds, without excavating the history. And remarkably, surprisingly, it was okay. It wasn't healing. It wasn't deep connection. It wasn't the relationship I'd once dreamed of having with my mother. But it was civil. It was survivable. It was 25 minutes of being in the same room without anyone getting hurt. At 1:18, 7 minutes before our time was up, she shifted in her seat, and I saw it coming. Saw the way her face changed, the way she took that particular breath that meant she was about to say something she'd been holding back. "I want to understand what happened," she said, and her voice was gentle, but I could hear the edge underneath it, could hear the way this was heading. "I want to know what we did that was so terrible that you needed a court order to keep us away. If you would just tell us what we did wrong, we could apologize, we could fix it." I felt the pull immediately, felt how much I wanted to explain, to list everything, to make her understand. But I looked at my index card. I looked at the clock. I kept my voice steady and said exactly what I'd planned to say if this happened. "That's history. We agreed no history today. If you want to continue this meeting, we stay in present tense for the remaining 7 minutes." She started to argue. I could see it gathering in her face, could see the words forming, could see that familiar pattern of escalation that had defined our relationship for 3 decades. Her mouth opened. Her volume started to rise slightly, just a fraction, just enough that I could hear it. And then she stopped herself. She actually stopped. She took a breath. She said, "You're right. I'm sorry. You're right." I felt something shift in my chest, something small but significant. She'd caught herself. She'd chosen, in that moment, to follow the boundary instead of fighting it. It didn't erase 30 years of harm. It didn't fix everything. But it was something. It was data. It was evidence that change might be possible, even if it was slow, even if it was imperfect, even if it only happened when there were clear consequences for not changing. "Tell me more about this promotion at work," she said, her voice back to that careful neutral register. "What would the new position involve?" We talked for the remaining 7 minutes about my work, about hotel operations and scheduling systems, and the challenges of coordinating a team. Normal topics, safe topics, present tense only topics. At 1:24, I glanced at the clock and said, "We have 1 minute left. If you'd like to meet again, you can email me following the same format. Purpose, options, attendees." She nodded. "Same time in 2 weeks? Just checking in again, like this?" "Email me the format," I said, not agreeing automatically, not letting her assume, maintaining the structure even though we were ending positively. "I'll reply within 24 hours. At 1:25 exactly, I stood up. I picked up my index card and slid it back into my pocket. "Thank you for coming," I said, "and for following the structure." That mattered to me. For a second, I thought she might try to hug me, and I had my exit strategy ready, my body already positioning itself to step back, to maintain physical boundaries. But she didn't. She just stood too, gathered her things and said, "Same time 2 weeks from now. I'll send the email." Then she added more quietly, "I miss you." I didn't say I miss you too, because I didn't know if that was true. Didn't know if what I missed was her, or the mother I wished she was, or just the concept of having a mother who was safe. So I just said, "I'll look for your email." And I made the universal signal for the check to our server, showing we needed to pay. "Mine separate," I said when the server brought the receipts, and I said it matter-of-factly, not apologetically, just as a statement of fact. Money is a boundary, whether you whisper it or shout it. My mother didn't flinch this time. She just paid for her coffee, and I paid for my tea, and we walked out of that Starbucks into the gray drizzle of a Seattle March afternoon. We stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, both of us with our umbrellas up, both of us looking at each other across a distance that was both 3 feet and 30 years. "Goodbye," I said. "Goodbye," she said. "I'll email." I walked left toward the bus stop. She walked right toward her car. I didn't look back. I got on the bus, and I rode it 3 stops past my usual stop just to give myself time to process, to feel what I was feeling without having to perform or function or do anything productive. I felt shaky. I felt proud. I felt sad and relieved and exhausted and hopeful all at once. I got off at a stop near a small park, and I sat on a bench in the rain for 10 minutes, just sitting, just being, just letting my nervous system come down from high alert. Then I pulled out my phone, and I documented everything while it was fresh, while my memory was clear and unfiltered. Time: 1:1:1:25 exactly. Location: Starbucks on Broadway. Attendees: mom only, as agreed. Structure: terms card present on table, reviewed at start, referred to once during meeting. Topics discussed: work, garden, books, school, general life updates. Boundary moments: one attempt to discuss history at 1:18, redirected successfully. She corrected herself and returned to present tense. Volume: remained level throughout. My emotional state: nervous at start, steady through middle, proud at end. Her compliance: 95%. Only one boundary test, which she self-corrected. Next steps: we'll wait for email with proper format before agreeing to next meeting. Overall assessment: structure held. Meeting was survivable. First successful maintained boundary in years. I took a screenshot of that note. I emailed it to myself with the subject line: legal_030926_first successful meeting_Starbucks. I texted Sam. Meeting complete. Lasted exactly 25 minutes. Structure held. She followed it. I'm okay. Better than okay. Sam replied within seconds. That's the work. Not perfect, just structured. Very proud of you. I texted Mrs. Okafor. Meeting finished. Following the structure worked. She actually self-corrected when she started to violate a boundary. Coming over in an hour if you're home? She replied. Soup is ready, door is open. And I walked through the rain to Mrs. Okafor's apartment building, and I climbed the stairs to her 3rd-floor unit, and I knocked on her door, and she opened it wearing an apron and smiling, and I walked into that space that smelled like lentils and bread and safety, and I ate soup that someone else had made for me, and I told her about the meeting, about how it had felt both terrifying and manageable, both impossible and like maybe something I could actually sustain. You did it, Mrs. Okafor said, not making it bigger than it was, not turning it into some triumphant movie moment, just acknowledging the fact of what I'd done. You held your boundary for 25 minutes with your mother in the room. That's not nothing, that's everything. The weeks that followed that first meeting developed a rhythm that looked nothing like reconciliation in the traditional sense, and everything like architecture, like construction, like the slow, careful building of something that might actually be sustainable. My mother sent emails requesting meetings, properly formatted with purpose and options, and attendees specified. I responded within 24 hours with confirmations or alternative times. We met every other Friday at the same Starbucks, same table when it was available, same 25-minute window. The meetings weren't magical. They weren't deeply connecting. They weren't therapy breakthroughs or tearful reconciliations. Some went better than others. Some were awkward and stilted. Some involved boundary tests that I had to redirect. Twice she tried to bring up history, and I had to remind her of the rule. Once, about 2 months in, my father showed up uninvited, even though the email had specified mom only, and I had to immediately stand up and leave and implement a 32-day pause, because that was escalation. That was a clear violation of agreed-upon terms. But slowly, gradually, the structure started to hold more reliably. My mother learned that the consequences were real, that I would actually pause contact when boundaries were violated, that the structure wasn't negotiable no matter how much she disagreed with it or how hurt she felt by it. And remarkably, as the months passed, the meetings became less tense. We developed a kind of distant civility, a surface-level relationship that wasn't intimate or healing, but was survivable, was sustainable, was better than nothing, and infinitely better than the toxic dynamic we'd had before. More importantly, I was building a life, not just maintaining boundaries with my family, but actually constructing an existence that felt like mine, that felt worth protecting, that felt like something I wanted to wake up to every morning. I got the promotion at work that I'd mentioned to my mother. I became a scheduling coordinator, which meant more money and more responsibility, and more confidence that I was competent at something, that I could succeed at something, that I wasn't the disaster or failure my parents had sometimes implied I was. I finished 3 online courses toward my business degree. I passed exams I'd studied for in the library at that table, where the light flickered, but the quiet was perfect. I framed my grade reports and put them on my refrigerator next to Mrs. Okafor's recipe for lentil soup and a photograph of Sam and me at a work event, both of us laughing about something I couldn't even remember, but that had made us happy in that moment. I decorated my apartment, which sounds trivial, but felt revolutionary. I'd been living there for 2 years, and I'd kept it sparse, temporary feeling, like I might have to flee at any moment, like I couldn't afford to get attached or settled or comfortable. But slowly, as the structure with my parents held, and the boundaries stayed firm, and I started to believe I might actually be safe, I began adding things, a plant first, a pothos that the woman at the nursery promised was unkillable, that just needed water once a week and medium light. I named it Frank, which made Mrs. Okafor laugh, and I watered it every Sunday and watched it grow new leaves, and felt like maybe I was the kind of person who could keep things alive. Then, a bookshelf I assembled myself, following the instructions carefully, taking pride in the fact that I could do this. I could build something. I could make furniture out of flat pack pieces and an Allen wrench and determination. Art on the walls next. Prints I bought at a street fair. Photographs I'd taken myself and had printed and framed. Things that represented my taste, my preferences, my aesthetic choices that had nothing to do with what my parents would have chosen or approved of. Each small addition was a vote of confidence in my own future, a statement that I planned to still be here in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years. That this apartment wasn't just a temporary hiding place, but was becoming a home. I started a small side project, teaching other women my documentation systems and boundary frameworks, meeting them at coffee shops and walking them through the same steps that had saved me. I'd posted in an online support group about my filing system, about my SBL framework, about the structure I'd built, and I'd gotten messages from women asking if I could help them build something similar. So I did. I met with them for 25-minute sessions, just like my sessions with my mother, because that time frame worked, because it was contained and manageable and didn't drain me. I charged a small fee because Mrs. Okafor had insisted that my time and expertise were valuable, that I shouldn't give everything away for free, that part of building a sustainable life meant valuing my own labor and knowledge. "You're not being selfish," she'd said firmly, when I'd hesitated about charging. "You're being sustainable. Free work isn't sustainable. You'll burn out, and then you won't be able to help anyone." So I charged $25 for a 25-minute consultation, and I taught women how to name their files and build their documentation folders and write their boundary statements and create their email filters. I showed them my index cards and my SBL framework and my meeting templates. I told them about 16-day pauses and 32-day escalations and the difference between being cruel and being boundaried. And they thanked me, not just with words, but with their own success stories, with messages weeks later saying, "I held my first boundary," or "I documented my first violation," or "I said no and the world didn't end." My relationship with my mother stabilized into something that looked like distant cordiality. We met every other Friday, unless someone was sick or traveling. 25 minutes, same format, same rules. The conversations stayed shallow, but they stayed civil. She learned not to bring up history. She learned not to escalate her volume. She learned that if she wanted contact with me, this was the only way it would happen. And apparently, this limited contact was better than no contact, because she kept showing up, kept sending properly formatted emails, kept following the structure even though I knew she didn't understand it, or agree with it, or like it. Sometimes she asked if we could extend to 30 minutes. I always said no. 25 minutes was what we'd agreed on, and changing it would be changing the structure that made the meetings possible. She looked disappointed each time, but she nodded and accepted it. Once she asked if my father could join us. I said he could email me separately after his 32-day pause ended, using the proper format, and we'd see. He never did. The effort of following structure was apparently more than he was willing to invest, which told me everything I needed to know about his level of commitment to having a relationship with me. I kept my documentation system even though months passed without needing to reference it. I kept my terms card even though I had it memorized. I kept my communication windows even though the unscheduled messages had mostly stopped. I kept all of it because these systems weren't just protection against my parents anymore. They were the architecture of a life that functioned. They were proof that I could build something and maintain it. They were evidence that I was capable of taking care of myself, of creating structure, of living independently and safely and with increasing confidence. One Friday meeting, about 8 months after that first successful session, my mother asked if we could extend our time to 30 minutes. I said no, same as always. She looked disappointed, same as always. Then she said something that surprised me. I understand. The rules are the rules. Maybe we can work up to that someday, if I keep showing you I can follow them. Maybe we could, maybe we couldn't. Either way, it would happen slowly, with clear agreements, with maintained boundaries, or it wouldn't happen at all. And I was okay with that. I'd learned to be okay with not knowing, with letting things unfold at whatever pace they would unfold at, with accepting that some things couldn't be rushed or forced or manipulated into being. The thing I want to make clear, the thing I wish someone had told me when I was at the beginning of this journey, standing in my apartment at 33 years old with a no-contact order in my hand and no idea what came next, is this: you don't have to wait until you're strong to set boundaries. You don't have to wait until you're healed or certain or financially stable or emotionally ready or have your whole life figured out. You just have to be willing to start with one small structure. One sentence you can say, one rule you can keep, one document you can name properly, one friend who will hold your boundary with you, one neighbor who will store your backup files. You build a life the same way you build anything else, one piece at a time, with the materials you have available, in the time you can spare, with the help of people who show up. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be fast. It just has to be yours. My name is Ashley. I'm 34 years old now. I live in Seattle, Washington, in a studio apartment with plants that are still alive and art on the walls that I chose. I work as a scheduling coordinator at a hotel where people respect my competence and value my contributions. I'm 6 classes away from finishing my associate's degree, taking one course at a time, making steady progress toward a goal I set for myself. I have a documentation system that would make a lawyer proud. Organized folders that I can search in under 2 seconds. Backups stored safely at Mrs. Okafor's apartment. I have friends who love me in verbs instead of adjectives, who show up when they say they will, who help me move furniture and cover my shifts and text me recipe ideas and remember my birthday not because they're obligated to, but because they want to. I have a mother I see for 25 minutes every other Friday at a Starbucks where we both pay for our own drinks and talk about gardens and books and the weather. I have a father I don't see at all, and that's okay, and I don't have to explain why that's okay to anyone who doesn't understand. I have an index card in my jacket pocket with 3 sentences on it. Secure, boundary, limit. I have a zero-based budget that gives every dollar a job before it gets a story. I have a USB drive in an envelope at Mrs. Okafor's apartment labeled Backup Legal. I have structure instead of storms. I have systems instead of surprise visits. I have Wednesdays and Fridays that I can predict and plan for. I have a life that's mine. I don't have a perfect family. I don't have a viral redemption story or a moment of dramatic revenge where everyone finally understood and apologized and we all cried and hugged and lived happily ever after. I don't have justice in the way movies show justice, with the harmful people learning their lessons properly and changing completely and becoming the parents I deserved all along. What I have is better than that, more real than that, more sustainable than that. I have a system I can use tomorrow. I have tools that fit in my pocket. I have people who show up when they say they'll show up. I have a life that's protected by paper and schedules and the small repeated promise that I will not open doors I've decided to keep closed. I have the ability to say no and have it mean something, to set a boundary and maintain it, to protect myself without needing anyone's permission or understanding or approval. If you're reading this because you're where I was 3 years ago, because your phone is lighting up at midnight with calls from people who claim to love you but can't seem to respect you, because you can't remember the last time you slept through the night without startling awake in panic, because you keep apologizing for having needs and boundaries and limits, because you can't distinguish anymore between love and control, between care and consumption, between family and safety, I want you to know this. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to be ready. You don't have to have it all figured out, or know exactly how this will end, or be certain you're making the right choice. You just have to be willing to try one small thing. Name one file correctly. Save one receipt. Write 3 sentences on an index card. Set one timer. Create one email filter. That's how it starts. Not with strength or certainty or some magical moment of clarity. Just with one small structure that you can repeat tomorrow. The door sensor chimes once when the latch catches. The USB drive goes to a trusted friend's house. The budget gives money its jobs before it gets stories. The calendar holds the plan. The documentation folder grows thicker with proof that you exist independently, that you're building something worth protecting, that you're taking yourself seriously even if no one else does yet. And you, reading this right now, you can grow yourself a life that fits. A Friday you can keep. A door that only opens from your side. One boundary at a time. One documented moment at a time. One kept promise to yourself at a time. That's how you build a life worth staying for. That's how you become the kind of person who can be kept. By yourself first, and most importantly, and then by the people who learn to love you at the size you actually are, in the time you actually have available, with the energy you can actually sustain, at a distance that feels safe instead of suffocating. The apartment door closes behind me. The sensor chimes its single clear note. I'm home. I'm safe. The locks are changed. The documentation is organized. The boundaries are real. Tomorrow I'll do it all again, and that's not a burden. That's not exhausting. That's the whole miracle, the whole point, the whole victory. I get to do it again. I get tomorrow. I get to wake up in an apartment that's mine, go to a job where I'm valued, come home to plants I've kept alive, and walls I've decorated, and a life I've built piece by careful piece. And that's enough. Some days it's more than enough. Some days it feels like everything I ever needed and didn't know how to name. This ordinary life, this boundaried existence, this structure that holds me when emotions can't. This proof that safety is possible, that change is real, that you can grow yourself a completely different life than the one you inherited. You can file new paperwork, you can build new systems, you can choose new people. You can become someone who knows how to protect herself, who doesn't apologize for existing, who takes herself seriously enough to do the boring work of documentation and boundary setting and structure building. That's what I did. That's what I'm still doing. That's what I'll keep doing tomorrow and the day after that, and every day for as long as it takes, which might be forever, and that's okay too. Because this is my life now, this careful, structured, documented, boundaried life. And it fits me. It's mine. And no one gets to take it away from me anymore. The rain continues outside my window. The clock continues ticking in the kitchen. The plant continues growing new leaves because I continue watering it every Sunday. Tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll make coffee and I'll check my email during my communication window and I'll go to work and I'll come home and I'll water my plant and I'll eat dinner and I'll study for an hour and I'll text Sam or Mrs. Okafor and I'll document anything that needs documenting and I'll go to bed at a reasonable time because I've learned that sleep is not optional, is not a luxury, is a foundational requirement for maintaining the life I've built. And the day after that, I'll do it again. And again. And again. Not because it's perfect. Not because every day is easy. Not because I never doubt myself or feel guilty or wonder if I'm doing the right thing, but because this life, this ordinary, structured, boundary documented life, is mine. And that makes it worth protecting. That makes it worth maintaining. That makes it worth waking up for tomorrow. That's the end of the story. That's the end, and also the middle, and also the beginning. Because this kind of story doesn't really end. It just continues. It just keeps going. One day at a time. One boundary at a time. One small victory at a time. And that's enough. That has to be enough. That is enough.